The story takes place during the summer between my sophomore year and junior years of high school. I'm a 5'4" male, Hispanic, with certain parts of my hair dyed blue in the front, so not very threatening, at least that's what I thought. I'm an introvert. Because of it, a lot of people take quietness and occasional witty remarks as a sign of malice rather than the defense mechanism it is. Let's be honest, kids are mean. In truth, I don't hate anyone, but when you get hurt enough by enough people, you tend to limit how many people you let in. To my friends, I'm an open book. But yeah, despite my pacifist philosophy and the value I see in all forms of life, both human and non-human, I'm still the guy that gets all the weird stalker jokes and accusations. In 8th grade, my own guidance counselor targeted me as a potential threat because I sat alone at lunch, but that's a story for another time. Every guy I talk to calls me gay or makes fun of me because I'm a hopeless romantic with legitimate respect for women and a sense of human decency and not some heartless jerk just trying to get laid. In other words, I pride myself on being the kind of guy that I am, which is what makes this story feel so much worse than it already is. I had a falling out with a girl who was supposed to be my best friend. Let's call her Eve, right at the end of 10th grade. My friends are the people I care about, the ones who I'm there for and the ones who are there for me. She didn't want that, she just wanted something surface level. I was crushed after not just losing my second half, but essentially finding out she was never really there to begin with. And though I'm usually able to keep my emotions in check, I spiraled into a bit of a depression. My grades had suffered during the school year because of the anxiety my so-called friend caused me, as it always felt like I was walking on eggshells. But now that summer had started and I didn't have the daily routine holding my life together, I just kind of stopped. Part of me was relieved to have the weight of a toxic friendship lifted from me, but I still felt so empty inside, so alone. I had always been an outcast, so feeling like I was special to someone was a big deal to me, and losing it was devastating. I didn't draw like I usually do, I rarely went outside, I even got sick more often. I kinda just loafed around the house. Emotions are like a drug or salty food. They can be addictive, and even if they're bad, you'll keep trying to recreate them. When you're depressed, you don't feel anything. If you make yourself sad, at least you're feeling something. One day I was doing just that, reviving the pain by sliding through old photos on my phone. For Eve's birthday, I had made a video in which I got a bunch of people to hold up lyrics to the song My Life Would Suck Without You by Kelly Clarkson as the song played over it. Cheesy, I know. The photo app has this feature on it that allows you to see where pictures and videos were taken on a world map. Laying on the couch, I got curious and pulled up the map to see where everybody who had helped me with the video were. Harmless, right? Then I noticed that one girl who had helped me, let's call her Harper, lived within walking distance of my house. I had met Harper in the 6th grade, but we were never all that close. I admit I had had a little crush on her in middle school, but it was mainly because she was the only person who didn't treat me like trash, and it was probably just because she felt sorry for me. We didn't have anything in common, and it always seemed like I was invisible to her. She was sweet, but she just saw right through me. I had gotten over any feelings for her a while ago, but she would still say hi and we would talk once in a blue moon. I would like to reiterate that I did not go searching on the web for her address or follow her home. I just happened to notice because it was in the app, along with several other people. It could have been anyone. For a few days I actually forgot about it completely, trying to distract myself from any thought of Eve by watching YouTube and collecting stupid memes. It wasn't until almost a week later that I remembered. Now, this is something that only fellow misfits will understand, and it drives my mother absolutely crazy when it happens. When I see someone I know in public, I tend to wander around them and wait for them to notice me. I don't want to go up and say hi to someone who would rather I drop dead than have to talk to me. If they speak up first, I know I'm in the clear. It's stupid, I know. I just don't want to overstep and embarrass myself. If your company is rejected by most people, a simple hello, someone going out of their way to talk to you, can really act as a confidence booster. It's nice to feel wanted in one way or another, and after I tried to be the best friend I could for Eve, I still wasn't good enough. Well, you see where this is going. Keep in mind, this is North Carolina in the middle of June. I wasn't about to walk half a mile during the middle of the day. I go on a walk throughout the neighborhood every night, so my parents really wouldn't suspect anything. I guess that should have been my first clue, If I was keeping my plan for them, deep down I knew something about what I was doing wasn't right. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I set out. I actually took a few wrong turns before getting to her street. As I walked down, I had this sudden heavy feeling in my throat, but I chalked it up to nerves. It wasn't until I came to the actual house itself that it all began to set in. What exactly was my plan? To walk past their house and hope someone would notice me. Just then, I saw a car pull into the driveway and Harper's brother step out. He paused, gave me a puzzled look, and walked inside. That was when it really hit me. What am I doing? Standing outside the house of a girl that I barely knew in the middle of the night, that's what. I can make all the excuses I want, that I wasn't thinking straight or that my emotions clouded my brain, but truthfully, I knew this was screwed up. My mind knew full well that this was not okay, and I just ignored it. I wanted to go and turn and run away. Right when I was about to sprint out of there, I saw someone step out of the door. It was their mother. I tried to act as casual as possible, even asking if I was making people uncomfortable when she asked if I was lost or needed help or something. I made up some nonsense story about having a faulty compass. I just happened to have one with me, and by some miracle, she bought it, or at least acted like it. She was very pleasant, considering what her kids must have thought and said before she came out. Once she was inside, I ran home. I panicked as the reality of what I had done hit me in waves. I didn't tell anyone what really happened, not my friends, not my parents. I told everyone else it was a coincidence and thought that if I just played it off, nothing would come of it. It's been several months, and Harper blocked me, as I discovered when I tried to text her about something completely unrelated. We have the same first period every other day, and she avoids me like the plague. I ended up leaving her a voicemail as my final attempt in reconciling our not even friendship. It went something like this. "Hey, it's me. If you're listening, and please just listen, I know I screwed up. I was a jerk and then a liar and a hypocrite, and probably a few other things. You have no reason to trust me or listen to me. I've been a lot of people over the past few years, and I'm sorry you've only gotten bits and pieces of some of the worst ones. There was something I wanted to talk to you about concerning that, but as I have realized, there's probably a lot I've done that warrants an explanation. I'm not trying to justify anything or make excuses. There's just a lot of wrongs that I've been trying to right recently. Just get back to me if it doesn't make you too uncomfortable. I won't bug you if you don't. Just think about it, please." "Okay, thank you. Bye." She never responded. I feel awful. I know there is nothing I can do to fix this. It will forever be a stain on my timeline that I can never scrub away. I was always an insignificant part of her life, and I know that. I was okay with only being a footnote in her story. I just wish it didn't have to be a bad one. Harper, if you're hearing this, I never meant to scare you. What I did was unacceptable, and I'm sorry. This is my dad's story. It's one of many my pops told me growing up. My dad is from a city south of the Mexican capital, and let's just say my father's childhood was quite colorful, to say the least. This city alone contains 365 churches, one for every day of the year, and the great majority built in the days of the conquistadors, so they're pretty old. My father is the third of 14 kids. No, seriously, and those were the children that actually survived. This was Mexico back in the mid to late 70s, and this was very common. In the particular area that my father is from, he remembers how city officials would hold competitions to see what mother had the most children. He clearly remembers one woman having 22 living children. Mind you, this was Mexico back in the day and Catholic down to the bone, so birth control was out of the question. Since my father was the third oldest child, and as a boy he was deemed old enough to help provide for his younger siblings. Again, this was Mexico in the 70s. There was no such thing as child labor laws. I'll call my father Andreas in the story just for the sake of anonymity. So one day, Andreas's father wakes up 12-year-old Andreas around 4 in the morning and tells him, "Get up, you're going to help Senor Manuel with his groundskeeping duties at such and such church. You need to start helping provide for your brothers and sisters." Andreas had no idea his father had made such arrangements, but did as he was told, albeit begrudgingly, because this was a time when if you didn't do as you were told, you got beat, And I don't mean just a simple spanking, I mean beat black and blue. It was late fall, early winter, and since Andreas and his family were poor, the closest thing he had to a coat was the blanket off his bed. Senor Manuel was already waiting for Andreas outside, and since it was cold weather, the sun wasn't even peeking in the horizon yet. So here goes Andreas, rubbing the grit from his eyes, grumpy that he had to be up so early and in the cold to help out with his brothers and sisters, when suddenly Senor Manuel spoke up. "Listen, kid, I only agreed to this to help out your father, but you're going to get in my way more than you help, so just go into the church and do whatever you want, just stay out of my way." Andreas perked up at the sound of this. His father was still going to get a little money to help out with his siblings, and he didn't have to do any of the work. This was the best deal ever, or so he thought. When they arrived, because they walked there, Senor Manuel unlocked the old wooden doors to the church and told Andreas to lay down in one of the pews and keep out of trouble. Andreas happily wrapped himself up into his blanket and curled up on one of the pews in the old dark church. The only light was from the candles that were stacked about the church and in the old wood and wrought iron candelabras. Andreas quickly fell asleep. After some time, something woke Andreas up. He wasn't sure how long that he had been asleep, but he couldn't help but feel that eyes were watching him. He peeked out from under his blanket and screened the area. His eyes were drawn to a darkened doorway to the left of the altar, and the moment he realized what he was looking at, the air was sucked from his lungs and his whole body ran cold. There in the dark doorway were the faces of 3 men. Andreas couldn't believe what he was seeing and rubbed his eyes like crazy, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but they were all right there. The men weren't dressed in clothes he recognized, but in clothes that looked to be from hundreds of years ago. Their faces were dark and angry, and they kept making gestures at him that they were going to hurt him. Andreas didn't know what to do. He was frozen in fear and terror, so he covered his face in his blanket and began to pray. He peeks one eye out and is relieved to see the men are gone, and somehow he falls back asleep. After some time passes, Andreas, who is a very light sleeper, wakes up again, that feeling of being watched snapping him awake. He opens his eyes again, and to his horror, the men have returned, and they are actually standing outside the doorway now. Their clothes are old, and their faces are full of hate at the sight of him. They make gestures at him that they are going to hurt him, and one of them gives a dark smile that scared him more than the violent gestures. The smiling man gestures for Andreas to look up, and when Andreas does, a scream claws up his throat but dies on his lips. There, from one of the old wooden chandeliers, hangs Senor Manuel, and his entire body had been skinned beside his face, which is the only recognizable feature. He pinches himself and pinches himself in the hopes that he is dreaming, but he isn't. Andreas hears a creaking sound behind him and notices a silver of sunlight creeping on the floor of the church, and before his mind could register what his body was doing, he bolted from his place and ran out the open door and didn't look back. Andreas hears someone calling his name, but refuses to look back. It was indeed the real groundskeeper, alive and well, but Andreas was too frightened to look back. After that day, he refused to go into or anywhere near that church until he was around 18 years old. By that time, the church was mostly unused and borderline abandoned. He went into that church, went into that doorless room which led to some stone steps that went down into a type of basement. The room was windowless and empty. Andreas made himself stand there for an hour to prove to himself that he was not afraid anymore and that what he saw, although he couldn't explain it, was a figment in his imagination. Nothing happened. I asked my dad if he was scared, and he responded with, "Of course I was, but I had to get over that fear." Many decades later, after my dad had come to America and married my mother and started a life with her, huge earthquakes rocked his hometown. This was back in the 90s, and my father paid for a friend to mail him copies of the local newspaper from his hometown. What he read shocked him. Due to the magnitude of the earthquake that hit his town, many of the old churches were severely damaged and revealed dark secrets. The church from my father's story was among the damaged churches, and upon inspection of said church, the bodies of local native Mexicans who were forced to build the church were discovered buried in the walls. This, of course, made my father question what he had seen when he was a boy, and severed the last thread of his religious interest in the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, this was not the only case of bodies found within church walls. My father went on to tell me that a certain convent had the bodies of young pregnant nuns buried within, and some showed signs that they had been buried alive. It turns out that during the time of the Mexican Revolution, peasants took their daughters to convents in the hopes that they would be safe from the dangers of the revolution. Sadly, this was not the case. When these poor peasants would go to visit the daughters, some were told that the daughters were sent off to the Vatican to further serve the church, only to never be heard from again. This is just one of the stories my dad told me from his days in Mexico. To this day, my dad can't explain what he saw, but he remembers it crystal clear. Please take into consideration that this is by no means me bashing religion. This is just a scary life experience my father told me that ultimately turned out to have very sad outcomes for some poor people. I'm a girl. I studied Chinese at a university and went to China for a program exchange for a few months. Also, English isn't my mother tongue, so excuse me for any grammar mistakes. I went to a Chinese school in China. Everything happened very well, and after finishing my semester, I got extra time before leaving the country so I could visit around with friends. Me and another girlfriend decided to visit the capital during 1 week. It was January, so the weather was awfully cold in Peking, and after 2 days there, I got sick. But since we had so much to do, I just carried on for the full journey. Everything went okay. I discovered that I didn't like Peking that much, in comparison to where I stayed for my full semester, but some places we visited were beautiful anyway. What made the journey awful was the day before we left Peking. On that day, we had decided to visit a part of the Great Wall by our own. Since I was still sick, we got up a little bit later than expected, but it was still a little bit after noon when we got out of our motel. We made a few researches in how to get there, and all we had to do was taking a couple of buses. The final bus would make the longest trip, about 2 hours, and then we should walk about 10 to 15 minutes until arriving at the Great Wall. So that's what we did. When we arrived, it was close to 4 p.m. When we got off the bus, we were in front of a building with a parking lot area and, on the right, a large road that was leading to the Great Wall. We followed our Chinese Google Maps and climbed the road. It was literally on a mountain, trying not to fall off since the road was very slippery. After 10 minutes, we saw some shops on our left side, and we had the choice to keep using the road or using a shortcut through a tiny hall full of gift shops. Obviously, we took the shortcut. As we approached, we noticed that we had to climb 60-degree stairs, and my friend was already tired from all the walking that we had done, so we took a tiny break and she ordered some food to warm herself up. I'm just going to remind you that the weather was below freezing, even though we were wearing a ton of clothes. For myself, I wore 3 pairs of socks, 2 sweaters with a jacket and 2 beanies, and I was still frozen and couldn't feel my feet. So, we were tired up a lot more easily than normal. At some point, my phone even told me that it couldn't cooperate because of the freezing weather. After that, we climbed the stairs and finally arrived at the entrance area. We bought our tickets and entered in the Great Wall area. It was wonderful. We climbed a few stairs, took pictures. We pointed a spot that looked like the highest from where we stood and decided to go until there and then go back. The wind was crazy up there. That's where my phone almost died, and the stairs were polished and all bumpy, probably because this place is highly visited. That made the path even more slippery than the road was. I fell off at some point without even realizing it until my butt was on the floor. Halfway to the highest spot, my friend felt really bad all of a sudden and needed to sit. I asked her if she wanted us to go back, and she declined. She sat on one of the stairs and told me to keep going, taking pictures of her, and then we will proceed to leave. At this time of the day, the sun was going down. In China, after 5 p.m. it's dark, but there was still a lot of people on the Great Wall, so we thought it was okay to continue. It took me 10 to 15 minutes to reach the highest point. I took some photos and then went back to my friend, but she wasn't there anymore. I panicked a bit, tried to check my phone, and I couldn't see anything from her. I texted her and thought that she should have gone back to the entrance area. I went back to the area, but she still wasn't there. I noticed a big gift shop on the left and entered. I started to ask for my friend, and the man behind the counter pointed me to my friend in the back of the shop. She was drinking a hot cocoa glued to a radiator, but she was still shaking. I sat down with her in relief. We waited a bit more for her to warm up again and then left the store. We wanted to take the shortcut as we did before, but it was closed. We were used to seeing stores closing after 9 p.m. in China, so it surprised us since it was only a bit after 5. So we had to take the long way, and it's at that point that everything went from okay to a complete disaster. We researched on the way how to go there, but not on the way back to come back. We thought it would be the same, so it was okay for us. Normally there were 2 buses, but only one of them did the trip back to the city, and obviously we didn't know that. The first bus we took to arrive there was going one way and stopped after 9 p.m. The only bus that could drive us back to the capital stopped riding at 5 p.m. We learned that the hard way. We were going down the road when we saw 2 big cars with 2 suspicious guys. One of them tried to stop us and yelled in an approximate English of, "No more bus, go with me taxi." I knew exactly what kind of taxis they were. I've been warned by other friends that some people waited at the Great Wall and pretended to be a taxi. They usually propose to drive you to the nearest bus stop, but that trip is overpriced. We refused, as we thought at that point that the first bus we took could still drive us back home. We kept walking, but the guy still talked to us. We thought he would stop after a while since we ignored him. We didn't know how wrong we were. We were walking, still trying not to fall, and we didn't hear from the guy for a couple of minutes, so we thought that he had gotten over it. And then we heard a car slowly driving behind us. There were some larger areas in front of us, and the guy drove until there and turned off the car and got out of it. He tried again to persuade us to go with him. He said the price of the trip, and we said no in Chinese. We told him it was too expensive and then started walking again. We could hear him say, "No bus to Peking, bus station very far," but we ignored him. My friend was still feeling really bad, and it was difficult for us to climb down. We heard him going back in his car and was driving at our pace next to us. He kept talking and blocked the road once again. At this point, my friend had had enough, and she told him she was feeling bad, and she was okay to go with him if he lowered his price. He said no, so we kept walking. I told her there was no use to show him interest, otherwise he would keep bothering us and try scamming us while the bus stop was only about 10 minutes away from us. Obviously, he didn't stop there and kept following us and talking to us. He stopped his car again in front of us and finally said he was okay to lower the price. I had pity for my friend's state of health, and I was also tired and feeling weak. We talked a bit together to decide whether we should go with him, and we were on the verge of saying yes. Then I had a gut feeling. We were 2 young girls lost in the middle of nowhere, and he insisted a lot to go with him. I remember the stranger danger talk with my mom when I was a child, grabbed my friend's arm, said no again, and helped her to come down. We used a little path so the car couldn't follow directly, thinking we were done with him, but we could still see him from there, and he was still asking to come with him. My friend was almost crying from pain, and all I thought was that I had to be strong for the both of us. I screamed at the man, threatening to call the cops, and told him to buzz off. He laughed, and the second man from earlier arrived with his car. They had a chat, and we decided to use that distraction to flee. Thankfully, he stopped following us after that. We arrived at the building with the parking lot area and went to the bus stop. That's at this moment that we realized there was no bus stop on the other side of the road. On one side of the parking lot there was a little kind of house with, we believe, 2 policemen inside. My friend went to ask them for help and waited just in case at the bus stop. When she came back, she told me that there was no use, and also they rudely made fun of her Chinese accent. I was mad, thinking that these men only talk Chinese while we talk 3 or 4 different languages. Whatever, I told her. We will wait at the stop and we will ask the bus driver. We waited for 15 minutes and no bus was in sight. We saw that there were lights on in the building behind us, and we went straight there to ask for help. A nice security guy told us to take the bus for one stop, and then there should be a bus stop on the other side of the road so we could have a ride back. He said that the bus should pass every 30 minutes or so we should still wait at the bus stop. He was nice enough to wait with us until the bus finally arrived. We did as he said, and after 10 minutes, we arrived at the next stop. At that place, there were more houses and buildings, so we felt a bit safer than before. We waited for the bus, but it didn't seem to come. After a while, a man that was getting at his trash saw us and asked if we wanted help. We told him we wanted to go back to the city and waved his hand in the air. "There's no more bus," he chuckled. "You should sleep here and go back tomorrow morning." That's when we noticed the guy went out from a motel, and he was probably the owner, so we declined his invitation. Thankfully, he left, but we were panicking again. It was around 8:30 p.m., and normally the last bus should be at 9 p.m. Yes, it took us almost 3 hours to arrive nowhere, while normally we should have been home already, but it wasn't done yet. We thought forget it, as we were so exhausted at this point, and ordered a Chinese Uber to drive us back to Peking. It would be expensive since it was a couple of hours trip, but we were too tired to think, and at least it wasn't as expensive as the fake taxi. The Uber driver arrived 10 minutes later. Still no bus came, but so we thought it was the best choice we did. He stopped in front of us, asked our name, and we nodded with relief. But then he asked how much we paid him. We share a weird look. My friend told him, "You should know it. You have the app as well." He asked again. She finally told him, and he responded, No, I want double the price." We were dumbfounded. How could even our Uber driver try to scam us? We argued with him, saying we don't have any money and we paid already with the app. We said we were tired, but he didn't want to change his mind. At this point, I lost it and just screamed with a low-pitched voice. I was deadbeat, frozen, and thought we were never going home. My scream did no reaction from the guy. Maybe he chuckled, but I can't remember that. I was having a huge panic attack. I was crying and begging, but this idiot didn't want to change his mind. I started sending my friends help texts as I didn't know what else to do anymore. One of them that lived in Peking at the time called me. She was trying to understand what was going on and listened to the discussion in disbelief. 2 old ladies were walking near us, so my friend stopped them to beg for their help. The 2 ladies talked with the Uber driver and then told us we should pay him. They were clearly on his side and thought we were dumb tourists and we weren't worth their time. They stayed with us anyways as my friend tried to solve the situation, and my friend was on the phone just getting angrier and angrier, trying to find a solution on her side. I was totally useless at that point. Suddenly, and thank the Lord, my friend got the idea to cancel this Uber drive and to order another one. Luckily, the other car was 10 minutes away from us. The odd Uber driver didn't leave us and still tried to bargain with us, even when the second Uber driver showed up. The old ladies left at that point and we jumped in the car without saying a word. Both of the drivers talked together. I couldn't understand what they were saying because I was still in shock, but our driver finally started the car. This time our driver didn't try to scam us, but I was tense during the whole way back to our motel, frequently checking the Chinese Google map on my phone. During my whole semester in China, this day was the absolute worst experience I had ever encountered. Some background information from my experience. 1. Our German Shepherd Rocco passed away about a year ago, leaving us with 2 pit bulls in the house. 2. I often experience sleep paralysis of the non-paranormal kind. This means when I experience sleep paralysis, I do not see any figures or shadows during an episode, nor experience any paranormal activities, which makes this experience very unique to me. I was having a sleep paralysis episode downstairs while dozing off on the couch around 2 a.m.-ish. My husband and the 2 pitties were already in bed upstairs, and I hadn't heard any noises that indicated any of them were awake. It's important to note that my 2 pits make clickety-clack noises with their nails, short as they are, as our floors are all wood and tile throughout the house. Rocco never made noises because he was always a proper dog and never bound around the house like these 2. During this episode, as usually, I tried to keep my breathing even, repeat a few prayers, not to freak out altogether. It never helps and often makes things worse. While doing this, I distinctly heard a dog sniff my ears and felt a wet nose. It was brief, maybe a few seconds, and I just figured it was one of the 2 dogs that came down to drink water or use the doggy door. Shortly after, and I mean minutes after if that, I'm able to move again. I never fall back asleep after a sleep paralysis episode. It always scares me to think that another may occur again, so I always stay up. And after I was able to get up and move again, I searched for which dog it was that sniffed at my ears. I did not see neither of them, so I crept upstairs to find that all 3 were fast asleep in the master's bedroom. It was then that I realized I hadn't heard any clicking noises from the 2 pit nails, nor did I hear them go back up the stairs. I told my husband, and, of course, he brushes it off, saying I probably fell back asleep and didn't realize it. I'd like to think that our faithful and loving Rocco came to visit me that night. This first story happened when I was around 12 years old, so back in 2007. During summer holidays, we'd hang out at a playground near my apartment, often way past midnight. It might sound weird for 5 kids to be out without supervision so late, but Finland is generally a safe country, and since the sun doesn't really set during the summer, our parents were really relaxed about us being out at night. So one night we're just chilling as usual, laughing probably louder than is polite, when we hear a car driving fast on the gravel road leading to the playground. We hear it stop at a small opening meant as a parking lot for visitors before starting up again. The car does what sounds like donuts before driving away, only to repeat the same thing a couple of more times. At this point, we've all gone quiet, listening to the car as it keeps repeating the same steps. Now, we're at a position where we can't really see the car because the playground is surrounded by forest, so we can only know what's happening by sound. The car leaves again and comes back just as the oldest one of us at 13, called R, does what I still to this day consider one of the stupidest things he's ever done. From the top of his lungs he screams, "Come play with us." And then the car stops. There's this moment of silence where we just look at each other. We all let out a sigh of relief when the car starts up again and starts to leave. We think we're in the clear when R shouts again, and at this point the rest of us are screaming for him to stop. We all go quiet again when we hear the car engine stop, and after this it's all very much a blur to me. The car stops, but this time we hear the door open and close like someone getting out of the car. I remember my friends screaming as we run through the playground. I hear footsteps following us, but I'm too scared to look back, afraid of what I might see. We run to the other side of the park and straight through a worn-out hole in the hedge fence, just big enough to fit through. It's a weird detail to remember, but I was the last one through, and in my panic, I screamed about not being able to fit through over and over until R and another friend quite literally dragged me to the other side. Once through, we all just stood there in silence and in shock, but also relieved because we are now right next to a big road, and let me tell you, seeing the occasional car driving by has never felt so comforting. Eventually, once we feel the road is clear, we go back because R had left his bike when we bolted. We make sure he gets out of the park safely, all agreeing to send a text once we get home before everyone runs off to different directions. Safe to say, we didn't hang out past midnight after that, no matter how light it was outside. The thing is, while I said Finland is a safe place to live in, we happen to live in one of those worst cities. Better yet, 4 of us lived or had lived in the bad part of town, mainly inhabited by families living below poverty line and people suffering from addictions or mental health issues, and the playground was smack dab in the middle of that area. However, R was from a wealthy family and grew up in what I call the rich people neighborhood on the other side of town, and it took us closer to a month to convince him to come back and hang out with us, even during the daytime. The second story takes place in September of the next year. Me, R, and K, who was also there during the park freakout, have spent the evening in the city center. It's the Night of Fashion, basically a commercial festival meant to promote the local clothing stores with fashion shows and appearances from B-class celebs. Also prime time for teens a bit older than us to drink in public without any consequences. And we'd gone out with the same group of friends, but 2 of us had to leave early. Unlike the 3 of us, their parents actually set them a curfew after the previous accident. It's around 11 p.m. and the festival was starting to die down, so we head to the backyard of a nearby apartment building and just hang out at a swing set. People had started to head home a little earlier, and we can hear the last of the music blaring from the distance. So we hang out there for a while, not really feeling uneasy despite the growing darkness because we think that there are still people everywhere nearby. So what's the worst that could possibly happen, right? Well, after a while, a couple of older guys, I'd guess around 17 or 18, entered the yard and sat down on a bench. We pay them no mind and continue talking, assuming they're just there to chill, just as we are. Now, I'm not 100% sure what happened at this point as I have my back to them, but suddenly R and K go very quiet, shushing me as well while taking quick looks over my shoulder. I try to ask them what's up, but they still just shush me and stop me when I try and turn around and see what's going on. After what feels like minutes but was probably only a few seconds, R whispers, "Let's start walking away, act casual." Kay nods and we leave, and only at this point am I starting to get scared. As quickly as they can, they let me know that the guys have been staring at us for a good 10 minutes while whispering to each other. Okay, at this point I'm creeped out, but not as terrified as my friends. However, as we're walking away, Kay looks back and lets us know the guys have stood up and are now following us, matching our pace. We start speed walking and then burst into a full sprint when we hear their footsteps getting faster behind us. We run to the end of the road and make a quick turn right before a crosswalk. Kay sees a barely visible opening in a hedge fence, the true hero of my life, and crawls through, pulling R with her, who in turn grabs me and pulls me to the other side. We sit there, 3 kids on wet lawn right in front of someone's house, and watch through the bush as the guys come to the same crosswalk, and we're all just silently hoping they didn't see where we went. Someone, I don't remember who, points out that they're holding on to something, and since I'm the closest to the guys, I take a peek and it feels like my soul is about to leave my body. They've stopped, clearly trying to see where we went, and half hidden in their fists are tiny pocket knives. I whisper this to my friends, and whatever color was left in their faces immediately drains away. Kay starts muttering something in Russian, and I can only assume she's praying for our lives. Finally, the 2 guys evidently decide we must have crossed the road as they do just so, clearly still searching for us as they disappeared in the park on the other side of the road. We sit still for another 10 minutes and then get up before, once again, hurriedly going back for R's bike. He's clearly a lot more shaken up than me and Kay, so we walk with him as far as we can and then continue on the phone for another 5 minutes until he gets home. We walked on the side of the motor road as our only other option was an unlit road right next to a forest for another 15 minutes before parting ways at my place, and safe to say, it was the last time we stayed out so late. I don't know how much this affects the events of that night, but at the time we were all between 5'4" and 5'6", and although R was the only guy of the group, he was constantly getting mistaken for a girl at the time. All 3 of us were also rocking some major baby faces, leading to people usually thinking we were at least a couple of years younger than we really were. I'm 23 now and have multiple more stories for a later time, including some paranormal experiences as well as a drug boss living right next door. But as for now, we still don't know who those guys were or what they were planning on doing to what they probably thought were 3 preteen girls. For some background, my twin sister and I are females, and this happened around the year of 2012 or 2013. That would make her and I around 12 or 13 at the time. We are both currently 18, and the event that I am about to explain still gives me nightmares to this day, and I have to remember how lucky I really am to be alive. We are from the outskirts of Chicago, and at that time hadn't been anywhere since. During the Thanksgiving holiday, some family of ours from around the surrounding towns invited us over for Thanksgiving dinner, which would be in about a week. My family and I weren't really close, and everyone thought it would be a good idea to get together and spend time with one another. Boy, were they wrong. I have a big household, a family of 7. There was my twin and I, our 3 younger siblings, and our mother and father. So 2 of my aunts, both from my father's side, this is important to note, thought of a plan to separate us for more space, and we would all meet up again in the following days. My twin sister and I, being the oldest, got to pick who we wanted to stay with until we would all meet up again. Her and I chose our aunt for privacy reasons, let's call her Shelley. So my sister and I chose to stay with our Aunt Shelley as it was only her, my uncle, and grandfather. We thought it best to choose her because my other aunt had many young children and my parents had my youngest sibling, who was only a few months old at the time. We thought it would be a great time away from all the crying, hitting, and whining. Hours pass, and soon we're on the highway, making our way to our Aunt Shelley's awesome house. Well, we thought it was awesome at the time. It had everything kids could want. She had a lot of video games, a computer, 2 dogs, and she gave us all the junk food our little stomachs could possibly hold. About 20 minutes until we arrive at my aunt and uncle's house, my aunt decided to stop at a store next to Walmart. I don't know which store it was, as it was a chain of stores connected together, to pick up a few last-minute things she needed for Thanksgiving dinner. My Aunt Shelley and my uncle went inside the store, leaving my twin sister and I inside the car with my grandfather. Now remember, when I said the fact that my aunt was from my father's side was important, well, here's where it goes into effect. So my grandfather was also from my father's side, making him my father's father. My father's side of the family is Puerto Rican, and a lot of that half of the family doesn't even speak English. But my twin sister and I only knew English, which put my sister and I in an awful place during this. Now let's cut to the chase. A few minutes after my aunt and uncle went inside the store, my sister and I made a game of messing with my grandfather while he was sleeping. We'd tickle his sides, put jelly beans up his nose, kept rolling the window up and down in which he was leaning on. You know, funny kid stuff. He never woke up during any of our playing, but we could hear him snoring loudly. "He's out like a light," my sister said to me, and we both fell into fits of laughter. The minutes kept ticking by, and the parking lot around us grew smaller and smaller, many cars leaving and hardly any cars coming in. It was late when we looked at the car radio, and it was almost 11 at night. My sister and I were now getting antsy and needed to move around, as many kids do. As I was opening the car door on my side, a small black car pulled up beside my aunt's car, and I quickly shut it, as the car now beside us almost took off my aunt's car's door with how reckless they were driving. They seemed like they were in a hurry. I scoffed and looked back at my twin sister, who also looked as surprised as I did. "Geez, what's their problem?" I asked. It was taking the two men in the car beside us an awfully long while to get out. My sister was no longer interested in them and continued messing around with our sleeping grandfather. However, I was interested. I crouched my body down so my head was the only thing visible if you were looking at my aunt's car. I kept looking in their direction while also waiting for my aunt and uncle to get out of the store and come back into the car so we could be on our way. Minutes seemed like hours, and the men still didn't get out of their car. I could only hardly hear them talking. I grabbed the handle of the door, and my sister quickly grasped my arm. I turned to her, and she shook her head at me. "What?" I asked. "I want to get out and stretch my legs. I'm going to go check on Titi and Tio." Titi and Tio, which is slang for aunt and uncle in Spanish. She once again shook her head. She always acted like she was the boss, even though she was only 2 minutes older than I was. I sighed in defeat and continued watching the men next to me, which were now beginning to get out of their car. I sunk down further so they couldn't see me watching them. Both men, dressed in all black, slammed the car doors behind them, and one handed something over to the other. My breathing stopped and my heart began beating 1,000 miles per hour. The man handed a gun to the other man. I yanked on my sister's sweater and made her sink down to my view so the men could not see us, or so we thought. The man who did not carry the gun was carrying a large black trash bag. "What?" my sister asked. I shushed her and held onto her arm for dear life. She shifted under my grasp and complained about how I was hurting her. "They have a gun," I said, barely audible. But I knew my sister had heard me because now she was quiet and her breath also grew ragged. We watched as they grew closer to the chain of stores, and I knew we were both quietly praying that the men didn't go into the same store in which my aunt and uncle were in. Thankfully they didn't, and I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. Instead, they walked into Walmart. What I heard next still makes my ears bleed. I could hear very faint screams of the people inside Walmart as the man holding the gun pointed it towards the civilians. My sister jumped over and shook my grandfather, who was now awake. "Grandpa, Grandpa," my sister yelled. "What, darling?" he said in Spanish. She quickly went on a spree, trying to explain to my grandfather about what was happening. My grandfather tried to listen, but he couldn't understand, and him being as old as he was, he just fell right back asleep. At this point, my sister and I were now terrified. I still didn't take my eyes off the men in the store. My sister quickly grabbed the blanket beneath us and made us sink to the floor of the car, covering us up so we were no longer visible. It seemed like years, but soon the car doors next to us opened and we could hear a girl screaming and sobbing. My sister's eyes went wide, and so did mine. "Shut up and get in the car." That's all we ever heard the men say. I wanted to see what was going on before they left, so I did something I regret. I peeked up from the covers and slowly peeked over the window. I saw a girl, I'd guess around 16, in the back of the car, crying loudly. I held my breath and looked at the men in the front seat. 2 pairs of daggering eyes were looking in my direction. The guy nearest to my aunt's car abruptly opened his door, but he didn't get out. The other guy quickly grabbed him and shut the door. He only shook his head to the other guy. He looked annoyed. The guy in the driver's seat looked at me, smiled a sinister smile, and put his fingers up to his lips, motioning me to shush. I nodded and finally let the tears fall. I looked over at the girl once again, and she looked back at me, both of us wallowing in our tears. Her sad eyes still haunt me. A few seconds later, the car sped off, never to be seen again. My sister and I were quiet in the car. We didn't speak again until my aunt and uncle came back to the car. We both quickly jumped over our words to tell them what happened. They both just looked at us like we were crazy. It was probably just the girl's parents picking up their teenage daughter who didn't want to leave her friends. That's all they said. They never mentioned anything about the gun we mentioned or the trash bag. My sister and I cried in silence the rest of the way to the house. Nothing ever came of it. I now live in the town in which that happened. I still haven't went into that store, although it happened nearly 6 years ago. My dad is a nurse who works at a nursing home in a small town in the south of the Netherlands. I respect nurses a lot because you need a great deal of patience and have to be able to handle difficult situations, like someone with dementia wandering off and bringing him or her back safe and sound. His job consists of guiding and taking care of the elderly. He can get calls from time to time from elderly who need his help at night with, for example, going to the bathroom. He loves his job and makes a lot of hours working in night shifts. Seeing people leave, fully rehabilitated and ready to go home, always brings a smile on his face. But enough of that, on to the story. My dad had just started his night shift one night when he got a call by an elderly man who I will call William. William shared a 2-person bedroom with another man, Charles. These 2 men were mentally healthy and had no signs of dementia whatsoever. So, my dad walks over to the 2-person's room and asks William if everything's okay and if he needs help with something. William says, "There was a man in my room just now. He stood next to my bed and was wearing a long trench coat and had a top hat on his head, and he had this very large book under his arms. I didn't dare say anything to him." My dad looked confused and asked, "Maybe it was Charles you saw who got up to use the restroom?" William responded, "I did not make out his face, but I'm certain it wasn't Charles, because I checked and he was asleep when the man stood next to me." My father was pretty shocked to hear this and offered William to wait next to him until he fell back asleep. When William did, my dad checked on Charles, who was still sound asleep. Halfway through the night, my dad's shift ended and a coworker took over for him. He told her about the sighting of the man in the room. She didn't really believe him very much, though. The next day in the afternoon, my dad had to go to work again. When he arrived, the coworker told him what apparently went down last night. The coworker did not receive any more calls from the 2-person's bedroom. The next morning, as the coworker was making her usual rounds to wake everyone, she discovered Charles lying lifeless on his bed. She asked other coworkers to come help her, to maybe save his life, but they noticed he was already cold to the touch. When they asked William about it, who was woken up by all the commotion, now sitting completely baffled on the edge of his bed, he gave them an answer that left them confused and frightened. He woke up out of nowhere in the middle of the night when he saw that the strange man had returned. This time William did say something. He asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Unlike last time, the man spoke. In a deep, low voice, he responded, "I'm not here for you. I'm here for your neighbor. Go back to sleep, William." William was too scared to say or do anything after this. He shut his eyes and tried to fall back asleep, which, miraculously, he did. Later, the staff reviewed the security footage that was of the hallway in which the entrance of William's room was. No one except for my dad got in and out of that room the previous night. William still believes to this day the man who visited him that night was a physical manifestation of death. It happened when I just started college. I stayed in an apartment that was literally in the middle of the woods and isolated. Apparently my college worked together with the weird apartment. That building had always been famous for being haunted and people ending their lives there. Not proud, but it happened even when I was still staying there. I stayed in a unit on level 3A and my two best friends were on level 5. Let's call her Jess and 6, Angel. You see, the apartment sucks, and even worse, the past 6 months those 3 levels that happened to be our floors had no lights at all at the hallway. And the worst part was my unit was at the very end of the hallway near the emergency exit, and in front of my unit, all I could see was woods. It was completely dark if I were to go out to have dinner. Since we were all females, we decided to have a way to go out to dinner together without feeling scared. Angel and Jess would go out first and take stairs down to level 3A, and I would go out last until they would call me that they were on level 3A. And once more, we never took a lift since it stopped working way too often. One night, Angel texted me that she's on level 3A. Since most of the time she's always already with Jess, I was taking my time. I locked the door and looked towards where they should have been, and I saw both of them and they waved at me with their phone. It was completely dark, but I saw their phone screen lights, so I walked slowly since I knew they were together. I was walking down the hallway while looking at my phone. I said hi while looking at my phone, and without saying anything, I just walked past them and go towards the stairs so they can just follow me right behind. But what I heard was, "Where are you going? We're supposed to wait for Jess here." I stopped. I turned around, and there she was. Angel, all alone and no sign of Jess. I looked around for Jess, and she's still not there. It was all darkness around us. I remember it clearly. I walked past them and even said hi to 2 people. There I was, stood there dumbfounded and waited for Jess without saying a word to Angel. They still don't know anything until now. So who was it? The majority of my family does not believe in the paranormal. I was raised to believe that when you die you go to heaven or hell, depending on your beliefs. I personally believe that places like homes, hospitals, graveyards, etc. have energy, and depending on certain events, that energy can focus on bad juju, creating a force that is like an imprint of another time. Even though the belief in ghosts within my family is lacking, we have had our fair share of odd happenings, specifically in my grandfather's home. My grandfather grew up in dirt-poor, old coal-miner country Pennsylvania. He and his brother dropped out of school and barely had a first-grade education. The family was torn between 2 jobs, grave digger or coal miner, and my grandfather chose the latter. When he finally did get money coming in, he and his brother-in-law purchased a duplex. My grandfather, grandmother, and mother lived on one side, and his sister, brother-in-law, and my mom's cousin lived on the other. My mother told us stories of how she and her cousin would talk through walls, and how she would comfort her cousin because her uncle was a raging alcoholic and abusive to her cousin and aunt. Eventually, my mother's uncle ended her life, and her aunt and cousin moved out. My grandfather tore down the walls of the duplex to make room for foster children, as he and my grandmother had issues with conceiving more biological children. Off topic, eventually my mother did welcome a younger sister and brother when she was 12. My mother eventually left and married my father and had siblings and I. In a turn of events, while visiting my grandparents, my grandmother suffered a heart attack, gastric bypass gone wrong, and at the age of 40 passed away at home. My grandfather naturally went crazy, attempted to end his own life, rage quit his coal mining job, and went on disability. He refused to enter the house, placed the foster children back in the state's care, and moved my aunt and uncle in with a relative. He claimed that my grandmother was haunting him in that house. My family uprooted and moved into the house. We lived there for about 6 years. During that time, I always had the feeling of being watched. Me and my sister's room had a door that led up to the attic. There was always someone rattling the door handle, and my sister got into the habit of climbing in bed with me out of fear. My parents were on the other side, and their room also had a door leading to the same steps to the attic. My mother, the non-believer, had even pushed her dresser up against the door to stop the door from randomly opening. Then there was the window in the kitchen. It faced a porch, and when you looked at it, it always seemed someone was walking past. I swear there was someone walking past it. I never mentioned it at the time, but my father admitted he too saw the same thing years later. Eventually, my grandfather decided he wanted to move back in, and my family moved a few hours away, coming back every couple of months to visit it. During that time, my aunt and uncle moved out on their own, and my grandfather was introduced to a friend of my aunt's. And well, they shacked up and got married. At the ripe old age of 50, my grandfather became a father again, not only to 2 young stepchildren, but 2 more biological children. Yes, my aunt and uncle were 10 years younger than me. My grandfather told my mother about how he would get up with my youngest uncle and take him to the bathroom during the middle of the night. There was only one bathroom, and it was on the first floor. He claimed my uncle was terrified of the lady who walked around at night. My grandfather swore he could literally smell the perfume my grandmother wore, white chantilly lace. He said it made his hair stand up. On one particular midnight bathroom trip, he heard a scratching in the roof between the first and second floor. Figuring it was a rogue critter, he waited until morning to pull the tiles off and take a look at any damage done and lay a few traps. What he found gives me serious goosebumps to this day. Stashed away in between the roof tiles were old family videotapes of his sister's family from when the house was a duplex 30-plus years earlier. There were many other odd happenings, but the craziest is recent. Now my mother, myself, and my sister's family came into some luck when the 2 houses next door to my grandmother's became available. We snatched them up and, after some hardcore renovations, moved in. My mother and I in the house directly next to my grandfather's, and my sister in the same property as mine up on a hill with a private road. My mother had been looking to move back for a while, as my grandfather, after 20 years of marriage, found himself 70, single, and raising a 16-year-old by himself. Yes, some scum would leave an old man alone to care for himself and a young daughter. This left my father living with my twin brother, who incidentally lived next door to my oldest brother and his family 3 hours away. Though my father is stuck in a contract job, he and my twins still make way to visit every weekend, while my oldest brother visits once a year. He has had his own family after all. Though my grandfather is quite old nowadays, up until last November he still had one living sibling. He was quite devastated to be the last one of 5 alive. Now my oldest brother hasn't visited since September the year before, and decided now was the time to pay his respects and visit our grieving grandfather. He brought his 2 young sons with him. Mind you, the youngest was 2 the last time he was here visiting. We were sitting at my house, eating breakfast and waiting for the funeral service to start, when my brother came in with his youngest, now 3-year-old son, and announced he had asked him if they could go visit my grandfather next door. Here's the real kicker. He said that he wanted to see his friend Patty. My brother claims he never told him that name and had no idea where he got it from. Patty is my grandmother's name. We took him next door, and he told my grandfather he wanted to see Patty. My grandfather's mouth dropped open. He asked my nephew to point out where Patty was, and he pointed to the corner of the kitchen next to the window. He said Patty says it was all going to be okay. Later, when we got back from my great-uncle's funeral, we dropped my grandfather off at his door to find a single white bird feather stuck in his door, with no birds around. We were all at the funeral. There was no way anyone could have done this. In case you were wondering the meaning of white feathers, it means your loved ones are in heaven, safe and well. So this happened about 6 months or so ago in my home in a small town in South Australia. We had just moved into a new house, we being me, my 2 brothers, my sister, and my mum. My bedroom, which has many windows along one wall showing the entire backyard to be visible. There were 3 doors to my room, one leading from the laundry and toilet, one leading to the kitchen, and the last one was a screen door that led directly outside. Those details are important. The room was a rectangle. Down one end was the outside door, and up the other was my bed. One morning I woke up at about 4 a.m., which is really early for me, and I had this strange feeling that I was being watched, but I couldn't tell what it was. I tried to look around, but I couldn't move. Oh man, I thought. I had heard plenty of stories about sleep paralysis, but I never thought I'd experience it. Wait, during sleep paralysis, normally people see really weird stuff. I didn't see anything. I managed to move my eyes finally. I looked at the cupboard next to my bed, and then, next thing I knew, I looked at the clock on the cupboard and it was 6 a.m. I could now stand and everything seemed fine. Skipped to the next morning at about the same time and I woke up. I was able to move this time. I couldn't get back to sleep though. I had the same feeling of being watched. I got up and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but as I stood up, I looked at the screen door and saw a face. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just any face. It was the face of a clown. I know, it sounds stupid. I stared in shock. I couldn't move. Then it just vanished. I collapsed to the floor, wondering what had just happened. Needless to say, I moved out of that room pretty soon, although my mom didn't believe me about the clown or the sleep paralysis. But I thought it was over. I was so wrong. Once I had moved rooms, I had about a week where everything was fine. Then it began. My bedroom door would open, even though there was no wind and it was perfectly closed. Book pages would flip themselves. I'd wake up to the sound of knocking on my window, and although it had died down a bit, I think it's because my sister is in my old room now, and she's been complaining about how hard it is to sleep. I've always believed in ghosts and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know, guys. Is this a ghost or just mine and my sister's imagination? Keep in mind this is 2018 and the clown thing died years ago. I'll update if anything happens. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, or Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt.com. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.